Today is July 15th, 2024. Welcome again to a short educational instructional video courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. Here's a chart of the S&P 500. We hear about it practically every day. Tune into any financial news platform, be it Bloomberg or take your pick. They are going to tell you what the S&P 500 is doing. And this weekly candlestick chart basically tells you the story. It's going very steadily higher and higher from the lower left to the upper right. And it is driven in large measure, if not entirely, by a group of big name tech stocks. Call them the Magnificent Seven, the Magnificent Six, whatever. But that is what is driving the S&P 500. Now, if you've been following my financial astrology almanac, my newsletters, my posts on Substack and what have you, you will by now be aware that I use the techniques of Louise McWhirter, and she published a very profound book way back in 1937, and she showed in her book how you can identify the swing points on a price chart. Now, back then there was no S&P 500. She used the Dow Jones, but she showed if you take a look at the natal horoscope of the New York Stock Exchange, and if you identify the key points on that horoscope, and then if you look at the moon, sun, Mars, Venus, passing some of those key points, she said those passages, those transits, align to many of the swing points, the pivot points, the reversal points on a chart of the Dow Jones. And like I say, I've shown time and time again how that works on the S&P 500. So, yes, the media likes to quote the S&P 500, but there's something that they very seldom, if ever, mention. And that is an index called the S&P 600. So what is the S&P 600? Well, very simply put, it is a grouping of 600 smaller cap stocks. And there is a committee that meets to determine the makeup of this group of 600. The stocks have to have earnings, and there's various other criteria to be included in the S&P 600. But the key point is the media very seldom talks about the S&P 600. They prefer the sexiness, the glamour of the S&P 500, because that then allows them to talk about Nvidia, Facebook, Amazon, and all of the other magnificent ones that are driving the market. So how do you follow the S&P 600? Well, I've found a way, and it is an ETF. It's called the iShares Core S&P Small Cap ETF. The ticker symbol is IJR, and it trades right now in and around the $110 per share mark. Now take a look at this chart. Very different from the S&P 500, isn't it? The S&P 500 is going like an arrow from lower left to upper right. This guy here has been struggling, which tells you something. The small cap portion of the US economy is struggling. Interest rates have risen, inflation is sticky, and yeah, small cap businesses that are not the Nvidias and the Facebooks of the world are struggling. And as you can see, the IJR has been in a sideways consolidation pattern, certainly since the beginning of 2024 now. So here's the question. We know that if we look at the natal horoscope of the New York Stock Exchange, we know that things like Moon and Sun and Mars passing key points on that natal horoscope align to the pivot points on the S&P 500. So do these same passages, these same transits then, also align to price pivot points on the S&P 600? Let's take a look. The short answer, yeah, they do. Definitely they do. And so, knowing that, you can now use everything that I talk about on the S&P 500. You can use all of those same transits, passages, alignments, and you can apply them then to the IJR small cap ETF. And to show you an example, I recently, in one of my newsletters, presented this very chart that you see here on the screen in front of you. And I said that come July 14th and 15th, give or take, Mars was going to be going by the natal sun point of the NYSE. And what do we see that has happened on IJR recently? Yeah, take a look at the right-hand side of this chart. It has literally just lifted. It has exploded to the upside. Human emotion has been triggered at that passage of Mars and the natal sun. And earlier today, I posted a video with regards to the Donald Trump thing. And in that one, I talked about Mars and Uranus being conjunct to one another. And sure enough, that conjunction was also enough then to influence the financial markets, in addition to influencing some personal events in his life over the weekend. But the point is, the astrology of the S&P 500 works just as well for the S&P 600. And so again, to emphasize the point, two different groups of stocks. S&P 500, big cap, big name. S&P 600, smaller cap, names that you largely maybe have never heard of before. They both trade on the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street in New York City. Both of these groupings, both of these indices respond to the moon and other planets going by the key points on that 1792 natal horoscope for the New York Stock Exchange. So I take this as pretty solid evidence that astrology rules human emotion, and it rules individual stock markets and the people that ply their trade, investing or trading on those stock markets. Another way of emphasizing my point is all of that stuff that Louise McWhirter talked about in 1937. Yeah, it works. She was right. Truly, truly amazing stuff. So now you have a set of tools that you can apply not only to the S&P 500, but to the smaller cap index. And if you haven't read McWhirter's book, it is available on Amazon. It was republished in 2008. And I highly, highly recommend reading it. It is complicated. I had to read it literally 17 times before it started to click and make sense to me. But please read it if you are at all interested in the astrology of the financial markets. And lately, I have taken all of this one more step, and I'm starting now in one of my newsletters to look at cycles of individual stocks and cycles of indices. I've done the cyclical analysis on the IJR small cap ETF, and On a daily candlestick chart, what I have discovered is there are 4 dominant cycles, and they are 362 bars, 481 price bars, 561 bars, and 718 price bars. And I just want you to look very carefully at this chart. What am I going to start with here? Let's take a look at the 561 bar cycle, the blue arc. One of the things I look at, obviously, are the start points and the end points of these cyclical periods, but I also look at the crest, the peak, the midpoint. Take a look at the midpoint of the 561 bar cycle. Look at what IJR did. It peaked, and then it declined from like 106 down to below 92. Take a look next at the yellow arc, 362 price bars. The midpoint. What did the IJR do at the midpoint of that 362 bar cycle? It exploded to the upside. And then it reached a point where it could not go any further, and that's what started the S&P 600 into this sideways pattern of consolidation. Take a look at the green arc, 481 price bars. Where's the midpoint crest of that guy? Yeah, there it is right there in May, just recently. And look what the price did. It hit that upper boundary of that sideways congestion pattern, and it fell back. Now, take a look at the red cyclical arc, 718 price bars. Where are we? We're at the midpoint crest. What is IJR doing now? Human emotion is all in a titter. It's just people can't get enough of these small cap stocks, and IJR is surging to the upside. If W.D. Gann was sitting beside me at my desk looking at this, he would say, well, price has just taken out the previous pivot swing point. He would be buying IJR. And in fact, if you look at the technical chart trend indicators, something like the slow stochastic, it will very clearly tell you that IJR has room to maneuver yet. This thing is probably going to go higher. What is it that has got people so excited? Why is human emotion changing as Mars passes the natal sun point of the NYSE? Well, I think we can point our fingers at Mr. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve. He is now running around saying that he's not going to necessarily wait for inflation to get to 2%. He is prepared to take some action. Don't be surprised if he takes that action in September. And that's what the markets are anticipating, and that's why human emotion is so agitated right now. And all it took was Mars transiting the natal sun location of the NYSE to unleash that human emotion. And here we go. But here's what I want to point out. Come September, you're going to see the end of the 362 bar cycle on the daily chart. In October, you're going to see the end of the 561 bar cycle on the daily chart. What does that portend? Well, if Mr. Powell does, in fact, give us a rate cut with promises of more to follow after the election, that could very easily see IJR surge to like all-time highs. However, if Mr. Powell suddenly gets cold feet, the end of these two cycles in September, October could see IJR fall back down. I don't know what is going to happen. I can't predict what Jay Powell is going to do. All I know is that these two cycles are coming to a terminal end in September and October, and I always pay attention to the end points of any of these cyclical intervals, because that's when stuff happens. So right now, enjoy the lift on the S&P 600, but Watch those technical chart indicators, watch the moving averages, watch everything, because in September and October, which is not that far away now, something is going to happen. It could be something good, it could be something unsettling. We don't know. And I'll leave it at that for now. No need to go through all of this. You know who I am. Financial Astrology Almanac 2024. Follow the trend. I'm starting now to work on the 2025 edition. I've got my letters, reports, Substack, all of that good stuff. Check it all out. But just bear in mind that, like I say, all of this stuff that McWhirter talked about in 1937, it works. And I now have, two ways of demonstrating that, the S&P 500 and the S&P 600. Have yourselves a great day, everyone, and we will talk again real soon.